asked that Karen asked me to share with you that we have raised $2,021 for the Salvation Army Red Kettle Christmas campaign. Our crew at the Kroger on 71st and Benford last Friday received $391.19. So let's raise the challenge, continue to raise the challenge to our ringers tomorrow and next Friday. Remember that all gifts to the Salvation Army through the end of the year count towards the Indy Kiwanis friendly competition with Rotary. So keep that in the forefront of your mind when you think of availability for joining us at the Kroger store. Check with the Kiwanis office or donate online. You can also find that link on service projects page of our website, indykiwanis.org/service. Last week at our football banquet, we awarded $2,500 of scholarships from the Kiwanis Foundation to student athletes. Rice Walker from Speedway High School received the Colts Great Player Award, and Patrick Countryman from Brebeuf received the Academic All-Star Award. These players and others were nominated by their coaches. There was a beautiful turnout for the football banquet. We had more than 150 attendees from 18 area schools. Also, there is a video available from our speaker, Bill Brooks. It was just a fantastic program. And thanks, Chuck Cotterman, for your heading up the football committee. And Bill Dubois, the award sponsor, table sponsor, Roger Cummins, Rob Schlegel, Ethan Hemer, also Eric and Graham. Thanks for presenting, and as well as a big thanks to Eric and Lamitas gifts to the speakers and players, and our table sponsor, Duke Haddock. Mike, do we have Mike online? Mike Halstead? Okay, when he joins us, he can give us an update about the annual Kiwanis basketball program that's coming up in March. I think our football committee met just before this meeting. If anyone, in case Mike wasn't able to be available, if anyone from the committee wants to present an update on that program, please let us know. Anyone there? Okay, we'll just maybe wait for Mike. And next week, Graham has another fantastic speaker who will join us on Zoom. Ethan, I hope I pronounced your name right, Ethan. Butte. That's a difficult name to pronounce.
You got it right the first time. It's Butte.
Did I get it right the first time? Thank you. Well, he will be with us to talk about human-centered communication and how to be more thoughtful, intentional, and personal. That sounds like a good presentation that all of us can take advantage of. Also, I'd like to give a great big thanks to Graham Honecker on behalf of our club for the beautiful job that he did in presiding over our meetings and our club activities during the last year, 2020. He is now leading the foundation this year and will be soliciting, as he has done in the past, amazing speakers. He has also agreed to lead our Foster and Families event on May 12th. That's a great program, by the way. It is every year, and Graham will do another fantastic job with that. He has scheduled a committee meeting on Zoom next Tuesday for the Fostering Families at 10 o'clock in the morning. If you are able to be involved in that program, please get involved, or please get in contact with Graham. And Graham is with us, I think, is he not?
I'm here.
Graham, I'm turning the program over to you to introduce Dr. Friedman.
Good afternoon, everybody. Great to be with you today, and I am Thrilled to introduce Dr. Friedman. I have a goal every year of reading 40 books. That is my goal. I have not hit it yet, and I've got a few days remaining. I think I'm at 34. The very best book I've read this year is Dr. Friedman's, and I mean that sincerely. And I'll introduce him in a minute, but there've been a lot of books. My wife's still trying to get me to read fiction, and it hasn't happened yet. But I read a lot of books on personal growth and development and leadership. And there've been a number of books, I think, in the past couple of years who've analyzed really successful people and worked at determining what makes them great. But this book really surpassed the other ones that I've read. And so we're really honored to have Dr. Friedman with us today. I'm going to introduce him, and then we're going to do a Q&A with him, if that's okay. So Dr. Friedman is an award-winning social psychologist who has served on the faculty of the University of Rochester, Nazareth College, and Hobart and William Smith colleges. He's consulted for political leaders, nonprofits, and many of the world's most recognized brands. Popular accounts of his research have appeared on NPR and in the New York Times, Washington Post, Boston Globe, the Globe and Mail, the Guardian, as well as the Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, and Psychology Today. He's the founder of Ignite 80, a learning and development company that translates research in neuroscience, human physiology, and behavioral economics into practical strategies that help working professionals become healthier, happier, and more productive. His first book, The Best Place to Work, was selected as an Inc. magazine Best Business Book of the Year. And again, this is his latest work. So Dr. Friedman, thank you so much for taking time out to join us today. We are really grateful for you to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate the invitation. And I've not met Graham before. Graham and I have communicated over email. And I will just say, like, you guys are really should be proud and thrilled to have Graham as part of this organization, because I don't know a lot of Kiwanis programs that have this level of interaction with authors and speakers. And I just think what you're doing, Graham, is really special. So congratulations to everyone here for having Graham as part of this organization.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, there've been some silver linings with COVID, and one perhaps is that we transitioned to more Zoom meetings when we had to stop meeting in person. And while we love gathering together, we've been able to draw some just tremendous speakers nationally, like yourself. So thanks so much. So
thank you for the kind words too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do mean that. Absolutely the best book I've read this year. So we're going to do a Q&A. I'm going to lead that, and then at the end, we'll allow our guests here to, our members to ask questions of you as well. And so first of all, what motivated you to write this specific book? And I guess maybe before I ask that, if you'll give the readers just a little bit of background on the book. And, I talked about how you truly, Decoding Greatness is a great title, but what your angle was here.
Yeah, so the big idea for the book is that when it comes to achieving great things, we've been told two major stories throughout our lives. The first story is that greatness comes from talent. This is the idea that we're all born with certain innate strengths, and that the key to finding your greatness is just finding the right field, finding a field that allows your strengths to shine. That's the story behind people like Simone Biles, who can do things with her body that the world of gymnastics has never seen before. And the story we tell ourselves about Mozart, who composed his first piece at the age of 5. And people like Barack Obama, whose command of the English language has led not just to the presidency, but also to a string of best-selling books and now an entertainment empire. And then there's a second story. That second story is that greatness comes from practice. This is the idea that if you just have the right practice regimen and if you just work hard enough, eventually you'll become great. And the story of greatness comes from practice is why we love books like Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, the 10,000-hour rules. And people like, it's a story that we tell ourselves about people like Michael Jordan, who didn't make his high school basketball team, but practiced his way to superstardom. And Jerry Seinfeld, whose first appearance on doing stand-up was so bad, he literally ran off the stage. But of course, he practiced his way to the most successful comedy of all time. And But there, in doing the research for this book, what I discovered is that, sure, those two stories have some truth. Of course, there people are born with a proclivity to excel at certain fields. And yes, practicing does help if you have the time and the discipline to do it. But there is a third story of how people truly achieve at the highest levels. And that third story has to do with a practice that not too many people have heard of. Hopefully more people have heard of it by the end of this book. And that practice is reverse engineering. And reverse engineering simply means finding a great example in your field and working backward to figure out how that person created it. So for example, there are different methods of reverse engineering, and it all really depends on what field you're working in. So for example, in the field of nonfiction writing, which is the field that I'm in, nonfiction writers they will not read a book chronologically. They will often turn right to the end of the book and look at the endnotes to determine what are the sources that the author used to create that book. Chefs will often order dishes to go so that they can put a sauce on a white plate and look with a magnifying glass to determine what the ingredients were. I can tell you that photographers often look for clues in images like the lengths of the shadow and the reflection in the eye of the subject to determine where the light source was placed and the time of day in which the photograph was shot. So reverse engineering turns out to be a lot more common than people recognize. And it's the reason why we have things like the iPhone and laptops and personal computers. It's because reverse engineering is such an integral part of what goes on in Silicon Valley. But it's not just Silicon Valley, it's also the story of how authors like Stephen King and Malcolm Gladwell learned to write, and how painters like Pablo Picasso and Claude Monet learned to paint, and even how Judd Apatow is one of the comedic legends of our time, learned to write comedy. It's just a lot more common than people realize. And so the purpose of this book was to get some of those stories out there so people realize that they don't have to just rely on their talent. They don't have to practice for 10,000 hours. There's an easier way, and it's by finding those great examples and then methodically taking them apart to figure out how they were created.
That's great. Can you give us some more example? I mean, you had so many great examples of people. So as an author myself, which writing a book is something else. How did you do your research? How did you get insight into these stories, and what inspired you to pick these specific examples?
So one of the things that I advise people do as a key takeaway after reading this book, a lot of people will read this book and say, how do I apply this to my job? And the first step is to become a collector of those great examples. And I talk about becoming a collector as almost like building a private museum for yourself, one that you can visit so that anytime you need inspiration or remind yourself to think big, you have examples to look at. And so when we think about collections, we tend to think about physical objects. We tend to think about artwork or wine or shoes. And yes, you can have physical collections, but in the world we now live in, when we think about knowledge work, having a collection can extend to non-physical objects. So I can tell you, I know a lot of copywriters. Copywriters collect headlines. They collect powerful words. There are also the example of presenters. Presenters will collect presentation decks. Consultants will collect proposals. Once you have those exceptional examples you can look at, it becomes really easy to figure out what makes them great, because all you need to do is compare the ordinary against the extraordinary, the things in your collection. And when you compare what you placed in your collection versus what didn't make it, then you can't help but figure out, okay, these are the elements that go into creating an extraordinary piece of work. So in my case, I practice what I preach. I'm a collector. I collect academic journal articles. I collect powerful stories. And then my job as an author is to find linkages between those stories that are memorable and those studies that are actually powerful and impactful and can actually help people improve their performance. And that really is, for me, the art of writing, is trying to find those connections between memorable stories and great studies. And my first editor, when I wrote my first book, The Best Place to Work, my editor said to me, people want the studies and they want the numbers to understand that, this is based in science, but the thing that they're going to remember are the stories. And so your job as the author is to find stories that really convey the point in a way that's memorable.
That's outstanding. We have a lot of business leaders on this call, and you talk about reverse engineering business strategies. You write that if you work backwards, like Starbucks and Chipotle, they use the same strategies. Can you talk about reverse engineering when it comes to business?
Absolutely. So this ultimately comes down to thinking in terms of models as opposed to specific business. It's like pulling up a layer to figure out, why does a particular business succeed? And then how do I apply this to my field? Just so we're clear, when I say reverse engineering, I do not mean figure out what's working for someone else and copy it. What I mean is figure out why it's working and then find a new way of either evolving it or applying it to your field by combining it with your particular skills or the demands of your industry. And this turns out to be, by the way, one of the things that entrepreneurs do incredibly well. Is there's research out of the Harvard Business School looking at a comparison between really high achieving entrepreneurs versus middle managers. What's different about them? And when we think about that comparison, it's tempting to think that the entrepreneurs are, maybe they're smarter, maybe they're more ambitious, maybe they're more comfortable with taking risks. It turns out none of those things are true. What is true is that entrepreneurs are really good at finding patterns, and those patterns extend to why a particular business is successful and finding opportunities in their field by seeing parallels and then recognizing those patterns and taking advantage of them. So in the case of Starbucks and Chipotle, it's a great example because both of those restaurants, on the surface, they seem really different. One sells coffee, one sells Mexican food. But in fact, they're both based on the same underlying principle. And that principle is find something that is successful elsewhere and import it into your hometown. In the case of Starbucks, I'm forgetting the name of the guy who founded Starbucks. You remember this, Graham?
Yep, Howard Schultz.
Thank you, Howard Schultz. Howard Schultz, he's working for Starbucks as a salesman, but Starbucks at the time doesn't sell coffee in terms of food and beverage. It sells beans to connoisseurs. And so he goes off to Italy, he sees the espresso bars, and he wonders to himself, I wonder if this can succeed in Seattle. In the case of Chipotle, Steve Ells, he is a chef working in San Francisco. He sees burrito bars everywhere. And he knows if he opens up a burrito bar in San Francisco, he's not going to be particularly successful. So he decides he's going to open up a burrito bar in Denver where nothing like that exists. And of course, that takes off, becomes a very successful franchise. And so in both of those examples, it is finding something that is working somewhere else and importing it into your hometown. And if you can think in terms of that model, all of a sudden, business opportunities are everywhere because they're not that hard to find examples of things that are successful elsewhere that you can import, or vice versa. Think about what is successful near me that I can take elsewhere. And so when we think about entrepreneurs as being this wealth of business idea creation, really, it's not because they're any more creative. It's just that they're thinking at a different level. And that level is one that we can all apply to the way that we think about our own work.
That's great stuff there. Can you talk about again just the balance of being creative versus without being overwhelmingly original?
Yeah, so this is another one of the interesting findings in the book, is that when we think about being creative, we think we need to be complete originals. And that's the way that we're going to succeed and stand out, is by being a complete original. Well, it turns out that if you succeed at being a complete original, you probably won't be all that successful. And it's because originality tends to scare people. And it's because as a species, we tend to be distrustful of the new. We tend to trust things that we've had good experiences with in the past, which is why the most successful people are not necessarily trying something that is completely new. It's that they're finding ways of combining old ideas in a new way. An obvious example is the iPhone. Steve Jobs didn't create cell phone. He didn't create the MP3 player, but he led a team that combined two elements that people were already familiar with that led to the iPhone. In the creative sphere, a great example of this, of a person who's combining existing elements in a new way, is Lin-Manuel Miranda. Lin-Manuel Miranda, obviously in The Heights and Hamilton. And in The Heights, you would think that's a really original sort of play, but really a musical, but really isn't, in that what Lin-Manuel Miranda did was he took the formula of the traditional Broadway play, a musical, and he added to it salsa and rap, two elements that had not been part of most Broadway shows. And while In the Heights was a moderate success, it wasn't until he added a fourth element in the form of American history by adding Hamilton that it really became a sensation. So on the surface, it seems like Lin-Manuel Miranda is a complete original, and to an extent he is, but he's an original not because he invented something that had never existed before. He just spotted elements of things in different spheres and he brought them together in a way that had never been done before. And what I love about that example is that that's something we can all do. You don't have to try to reinvent the wheel. All you have to do is have a radar for things that resonate with you and ask yourself, how do I apply this to my field? And if you do that effectively, chances are you'll be viewed as really, really creative.
Love it. So this one fascinated me, and it's about Tinder. And I'm a happily married man, so I had to research what Tinder is. And if you're not familiar, it's a dating app where you try to match up a potential soulmate, I guess you could say. I won't go beyond that. But you talk about what can algorithms like Tinder teach us about improving our skills. Can you elaborate there?
Yes. So one thing that algorithms do really well is they're really good at finding patterns. And so the question that I started off with is, what can these algorithms teach us about being more effective at spotting patterns ourselves? Because as we saw, that's what leads entrepreneurs to be successful. And if you're curious to reverse engineer and get good at reverse engineering other people's work, is one element of that is finding patterns that you can then apply to your work. So I started investigating, how do these algorithms work? And in the case of Tinder, how it works is Tinder presents you with images of potential partners and asks you to swipe right if you find them attractive, swipe left if you don't. And then after a while, it takes the batch of people you found attractive and it looks for commonalities. And one of the reasons algorithms are so effective at finding patterns is that they're able to look past the obvious and find commonalities that we may have overlooked or may not even be consciously aware of that we're searching for. So for example, Graham, if you were to use Tinder, maybe you would select 3 individuals who all like spicy food, who are all of a particular height, who are all extroverted. You may not know that you're in the market for someone who likes spicy food, but the algorithm will find that commonality and start predicting who else you'll find attractive by feeding you additional potential partners who also share those commonalities. And that's why these algorithms are good at predicting what you're going to like. The same is true for all of us. Unless we have those examples of things that we find resonant in our collection, we're not going to be able to reverse engineer and make predictions on other works that we will also find appealing. And so that's why the first step is to start that collection so that you can find those commonalities among the works that you really like and start producing new works that also share those same elements.
That's outstanding. Hopefully I won't have to use those though. Okay, so not to get political, but you do have some really interesting stuff on Barack Obama and about winning ideas. And if you want to go there, and if you want to use somebody from an opposite political persuasion, that's fine too. But talk about Barack Obama and what you focused on here.
Yeah, this is not a political screed by any stretch. Regardless of how you feel about his policies, there's no question that Barack Obama is an above average speaker. I think we can all agree on that. And whether he's really not reading off the teleprompter or not, doesn't matter. He's effective, right? We can agree to that. And what's really fascinating about the story of Barack Obama is that when he first entered politics, he was a bit of a disaster. He lost his first race for Congress. It wasn't even close. He got trounced by a margin of more than 2-1. And the problem, if you can believe it, was at the time he was a terrible speaker. And he was a terrible speaker because he had been a law school professor. And as a law school professor, he was used to lecturing people. And one of the things voters really don't like is being lectured to, and they let him know at the ballot box. And so he gets trounced. He, for a while, thinks about leaving politics. He doesn't know what his next move is going to be. He's broke. He doesn't have any real career direction. And so somebody on his campaign team says, why don't you go check out what the pastors are doing in churches to engage their flock? And he starts studying them very deliberately. And he comes back, and all of a sudden he's telling stories. He's using repetition. He's citing the Bible. He is modulating his tone. He's using the pregnant pause. And obviously his career takes off. And what I love about that story is, again, it shows how if you can have that radar for things that resonate with you in a different field and find ways of incorporating into your field, you're going to stand out and be successful in the case of Barack Obama. And again, what his story illustrates so well is that Barack Obama, when he was at the nadir of his political career, he didn't go off into the wilderness to find his talent. He didn't practice for 10,000 hours. What did he do? He found what was working in a different field and incorporated it into his own. And that, again, is an approach that any of us can use to stand out from our contemporaries and really present ourselves as an original.
That's great. Diverting here, I guess following up on that, I have all of these books. I should show you my bookshelf here in a second. Maybe not as many as you've got in the background. And these books are awesome, but how many people do you think are actually going to take your book and do something with it? Because I find a lot of people read these, not self-help, but personal development books.
Yeah.
And it goes in one ear out the other. So far, since the book has come out, have you had a lot of feedback that people are actually taking these strategies and using them?
It's a great question. And the answer is I don't know. I'd probably get a little depressed if I thought about it for very long. But I'll tell you what, I want to give you a strategy that I think may be effective to the folks on this call. And this is one that isn't my idea. It's actually one that I learned from my client. And what my client has done is every time he reads a book, he underlines some of these powerful sentences that he really wants to remember. And he puts them in a document. And then he gives that document to his assistant. And the assistant is in charge of printing out these statements and hanging them up on his wall. And when he eats lunch every day, he sits and he looks at this wall, and he doesn't scan his phone for news stories. He's not on TikTok. He's looking at these quotes and these sayings and these ideas, and it's a source of inspiration for him every day. And this guy is super successful. He's not some schlub. I mean, he's super powerful. You guys probably know his name. He's very successful. And I just love that approach because it's a way of reminding yourself every day to think big. And sometimes we need that, and we need a way of automating it so it doesn't require thinking or effort. And that's a great way of making the default being inspired by great ideas.
Excellent. Let's go back to business here. Talking about the Ritz-Carlton. You say that the Ritz-Carlton hotel chain knows the secret to improving at anything. What do they know that most people don't?
Well, the Ritz-Carlton is really good at using the power of metrics. And so the first half of my book is all about examples of how reverse engineering is happening and how you can learn to reverse engineer and then evolve formulas like we've discussed so far. The second half of the book is bridging the gap between your goals and your current abilities. So it's all about the science of accelerated learning. And one of the ideas that I start off with in that section is the power of metrics. So anything you want to get good at, the first step is to start measuring your performance because it'll hold you accountable and remind you about what you truly find valuable. And so, for example, if you want to increase the amount of water you consume every day, keep track of your water intake. If you want to lose weight, one of the most powerful strategies is keep track of your calorie intake. And it's because, or one of the final examples, if you want to increase your focus over the course of the workday, is keep track of your uninterrupted minutes doing work. So the more metrics you have on your performance, the more likely your performance is to improve. In the case of the Ritz-Carlton, the metric that they are dialed in on is net promoter scores. And what Net Promoter Scores means, if you're not in the world of marketing, it simply means the number of customers you have who are going to go back after a vacation at your hotel and talk to their friends and colleagues about that vacation. Because, and what the reason they track that metric is because the Ritz-Carlton has realized you don't necessarily just want people to have a great experience at your hotel. What you really want is you want them to have a great experience and then go talk to their friends and neighbors about it, because that's how you get even more customers. And so every time you go to a Ritz-Carlton, within 24 hours after you leave, you will get an email asking you how likely you are to recommend the experience to a friend or a colleague. And then they take that number, they share it with their staff members, the managers. Every meeting they have, they look at their Net Promoter Score, and it keeps them focused on generating that extraordinary customer service experience. And so the lesson here for all of us is anything you want to improve, you need to start collecting metrics so that you are held accountable and are motivated to improve your scores.
Yeah, good stuff. This, for me personally too, read these books. One of the things, and I think there's a quote on this about extraordinary people, which again, I've been reading a lot of these books recently, is they don't focus necessarily on extraordinary things weekly. They focus on doing ordinary things really well. And the thing I took from your weight loss example, which is on my mind as we're entering the holiday season, is I think you talked about food journal, using a food journal, or tracking again. And going back to this question, maybe that I asked before, how many, like if you had to guesstimate a percentage of people who actually do this in their lives, what would you guesstimate?
Oh, obviously less than 1%.
Yeah.
But listen, being great isn't easy. If it was, everyone would do it. So it really does take work. But at the same time, I think the people who are really effective aren't relying on effort. They're creating systems that make it easier for them to just follow the system than it is to have to think about it or make choices. So an example of this from my life is every day after work, I go to the gym. I don't think about if I'm going to go to the gym or how I'm going to do it or what I'm going to do when I get there. That's just the default. It requires more effort for me not to go to the gym than to go to the gym, because that's the default. So the more defaults you can create that are focused around your long-term objectives, the more successful you'll be. It's all about making it easy for you to do the thing you're trying to do, as opposed to making it require effort. If you're relying on effort, chances are you're not going to succeed.
Yeah. I want to talk about courage. A couple more before we open it up to the audience. We're often told that growth requires courage. That's the only way to improve, is to take lots of risk and learn from our mistakes. But you found that's not how top performers go about it. What are they doing differently?
Well, many of the examples in my book are about top performers who are taking tremendous risks without it necessarily being particularly risky. So a great example of this is one of the methods I talk about for being successful without putting everything on the line is to sell first and then build later. So I'll give you a story that really highlights this approach effectively. Is the story of Nick Swinmurn, name you probably never heard of. And this is the late 90s, early 2000s. Nick Swinmurn is at the mall. He's looking for a particular pair of boots. He can't find them anywhere, and he thinks to himself, there's got to be a better way of buying shoes. The guy lives in Silicon Valley at the time. So of course, what does he do? He builds a website. But instead of trying to raise capital and build a shoe warehouse to stock so that he can sell these shoes online, what he does is he goes to his local shoe store and he asks to speak to the manager. And he says to the manager, I'd like to take a picture of every shoe you sell. And I'm going to post these pictures online. And if anybody wants one of these shoes, I will come to your store and I will buy it and I will mail it to them. How does that sound to you? The manager doesn't have to think about it for very long. He says, absolutely, sounds great. So he proceeds to take photos. He puts them all on his website. And sure enough, people start buying these shoes. You've never heard the name Nick Swinmurn, but he's the founder of Zappos. And what I love about that example is that he didn't waste his time trying to raise capital or build that manufacturing facility. What he did was he found a way to sell first and then secure the shoes later. And that's an approach we can all learn from, because I think for a lot of folks, there's a concern of, let me write my book and then try to sell it, or let me write my movie and then try to sell it. But really what you want to do, or let me try that big project, write the perfect memo and then bring it to my boss. But you want to start with the sale first, because that'll save you a lot of time, get you that early feedback on whether the idea is even going down the right path, and worry about building or manufacturing the thing you need to produce later. It's a way of shortcutting the ultimate result, because what you may find through that early feedback is that your idea actually isn't headed down the right path at all. And that's a tremendous waste of time. And so you want to jump to the next step as much as you can.
Yeah. I love the Zappos example. I wrote a paper on Zappos for my MBA. And if you want another good book, not quite as good as Dr. Friedman's, but read Delivering Happiness. That's the Zappos story. For those of you who are into customer service and culture, they've got a fascinating one. A couple last questions for me. When most people think about practice, they think about repeating a task over and over again until you get it right. In your research, you discovered an approach to practice that is far more effective. Can you talk about that one?
Yeah, so the traditional view of practice is to practice what I call in the present, which is to repeat the same thing again and again, get that feedback, and then use that feedback to try to improve in the future. There's actually two other dimensions of practice that athletes know about that most people don't apply in everyday life. One is practicing in the past. Practicing in the past simply means keeping a journal of your actions and your learnings and your insights along the way, and then reviewing them on a regular basis. I use this in my life in the form of something called a 5-year journal. You can get this on Amazon or really any bookstore. And a 5-year journal, the way it works is there are a few lines for you to input what you did and learned today. And then there are entries for every consecutive year on the same day. And so what you do is you input your few lines, you do this every day for a year, and then after a year, something magical happens, which is you get to input what you learned on that day, but then you get to review what you learned on this day on the same day last year. And it's a great tool for reminding yourself of past lessons, and also kind of predicting how you're going to feel in the future, especially if you read a year and a day in advance. So for example, before New Year's, every year, I will read what I did on New Year's Day the previous year and the year before that. And it's almost like getting a preview of what tomorrow might be like, and then avoiding some of the mistakes you would have made or you have made in the past. Practicing so keeping a journal about past performance and then reviewing that for new lessons, it's a great way of reminding you of some of the lessons learned. Practicing in the future has to do with visualization. So visualizing what you're going to feel like in the future before you get into the situation. So an example of visualization is if, let's say, you have to write a proposal tomorrow morning, visualize yourself sitting down at your computer, thinking through what one of the sources you're going to need when writing that proposal, how you might structure it, thinking through what you're going to do before you end up doing it. And the reason that ends up being so powerful is because you're front loading your decisions ahead of time. So in other words, you don't have to think through, what do I need to get? How do I proceed? Now you're just charging through, and it elevates your performance because you front loaded your decision before you sat down. So practicing in the past, practicing in the future, as well as practicing in the present.
Okay, last one for me. In your research, you found that practice often makes us worse at the skill we're practicing. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's because our brain is designed to habituate to what we've seen before. So if you're practicing the same thing in the same way in repetition, you're going to stop paying attention. And so what you need in order to elevate your practice in the present is you need to incorporate new activities or new practice partners or a new context. So for example, practicing in a completely new gym. Those are all elements that can help you keep you present in practice by changing something about your circumstance. Because if you just practice the same way, doing the same thing, your brain's going to go into autopilot and it's not going to work.
Yeah, outstanding. This is a fascinating conversation. And again, it's a fascinating book. If nothing else, you've already sold 5 copies because I gift away my favorite book of the year to 5 friends. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
won't be anyone on this call, but no, I joke. But you've got at least 5, and I do really encourage you to read this book. It is outstanding. I'm going to throw it out to the audience. What questions do you have for Dr. Friedman based on what we've talked about so far?
Dr. Friedman, thanks for joining us. I just have a quick question for you, not related to the book, but obviously you read a lot, as does Graham. I'm in the same boat, constantly reading. I'm always interested to know, what people have read in the past year that really got their attention. Obviously, your book got Graham's attention. What have you read this year that you would recommend?
Oh man, that's a great question. I appreciate it. And I'm kind of the opposite of Graham in that I read a lot of fiction. And I do that because number one, I try not to read in my field because I feel like there's a danger of recycling ideas, which unintentionally. And I think that fiction makes you a better writer. Reading fiction makes you a better writer. And also, there's research on this that to the extent that you read fiction, you actually are better at empathizing with others because one of the things fiction aims to do is to put you in the mindset of someone else. So what have I read this year?
I go everywhere. I read everything. I read
Good.
fiction, nonfiction, history. So if you've got a good fiction one, I'm all for it.
So I don't know if you've got any children you're around that you like to read to, but one book that I really enjoyed was reading to my son, who is 9, is J.K. Rowling's The Ichabod.
Oh yeah, I read that when it was when she released it online. My kids are long gone out of the house, but I read it by myself.
Did you enjoy it, Jeff?
I actually did. Yeah.
I thought it was fantastic. So she's got a new book called The Christmas Pig. It's not quite as good. We're reading it now. We'll see where it goes. It starts great, and then it gets a little bit loopy. But so I'm enjoying her books. I'm trying to think of what else really stood out. This has been a little bit of a weird year for me because you're in book promotion world. So it's, I would say J.K. Rowling really stood out. You know what? I'm going to go to my Amazon list while the next question, and Jeff, I'm going to call some things out as I find them, because that's always a good way of reminding myself of books I've purchased recently.
Graham, this is probably a question. I'm going to continue my question if I can, but it's probably a question for both Graham and Dr. Friedman. But as authors, and I love Amazon. I probably have an Amazon delivery on a too often basis and read their books. But is that good for an author? Does it just give you more opportunity, or is Amazon the devil for authors?
So,
you know what?
Real quick, Dr. Friedman, it's been the devil for me, and I want to ask if you're like me in this habit. You can get, like, every couple hours, you can go to Amazon and see where your book sales rank, which I'm disappointed Kelly hasn't actually linked my book on Amazon, but I'm sure she'll do here shortly. It is very addictive if you're an author. So I'll let you follow up with Jeff's question, but I hope you're not in that same habit as me of constantly checking the sales.
I used to be. I'm a recovered. I've recovered. I'll tell you why though, and this is actually highlights an important point in the book, which is that we talked about the power of metrics, the Ritz-Carlton, and how anything you want to improve on, you need to have metrics for. But because we're so drawn to metrics, there's that danger of those numbers becoming addictive. And for authors, it's Amazon. For other people, it's the number of followers they have on LinkedIn or Twitter, or the number of retweets they have. And there's something just super powerful about metrics, and you need to be careful about that because you're going to get sucked in. This is why all apps have numbers. The solution is to develop your own metrics so that you use metrics for the power of good in terms of keeping you on target for your long-term goals. Graham, I don't know about you, but one of the things that I've discovered, now this is my second book, is that your goal actually isn't to sell books. It's to get people to do something else. So for some authors, it might be hiring you to speak. Others, it might be hiring you to do a workshop. Whatever your outcome is, you need to get clear about it and then make that your metric. And then once you have a metrics to replace it with, that other metric, it's easy to let go. It's kind of like you can't let go of the last girlfriend until you have the first next girlfriend. So you got to figure out who your girlfriend's going to be, Graham. I know we talked about you on Twitter. Now we're going to give you talking about you in book sales. but truly, that is a solution to removing the addiction of numbers. But Jeff, you asked about whether it's good or bad for authors. I mean, that's one element is the one that Graham discussed. But you know what? The thing about Amazon is I think it really helped books that are not blockbusters become easily accessible to people. But the most disappointing thing is not so much Amazon itself, but what Amazon has done to traditional bookstores like Barnes & Noble. I go to Barnes & Noble and I don't know when they're going to come clean with people and let them know they're Toys R Us, because that's what they are at this point. I mean, they've really had to remake themselves into a toy store, and they only have if you look at the books that are really getting featured, it's like Patterson. It's like nobody else wrote a book besides Patterson. And it's because they've realized that 90% of the books they sell are those best-selling authors. So that's all they're going to do is focus on the best-selling authors. So it's crowded out some of these less popular books that I think really could become influential and can really change people's lives. So it's a bit of a tragedy, and it's unfortunately it's like the independent bookstores that are really doing this well, where the future of bookstores needs to be what Amazon. The reason we are all using Amazon so often, it's because of the convenience, but more than that, it's because of the recommendation algorithm. And so what they need to do, these bookstores, I think, is to take books that are popular and have them on one shelf, and then the shelf underneath is, if you like this, you'll like this. And then I have like 5 or 6 other options that are in the same vein. That's what readers really want from going to the bookstore, is discovering something new.
Yeah, I will agree too about not doing it for sales and doing it for trying to inspire someone to do something. Writing a book, you have to be very intrinsically motivated, because now Dr. Friedman makes a lot more royalty from his books, but I got in a lot of trouble with my wife because I had spent about 1.5 years on this project, and the first royalties check was coming, and she thought we might be able to buy a new house, and I was lucky to buy her Applebee's for dinner that night with the check. So you do have to be motivated. What other questions do you all have for Dr. Friedman?
I have a question. Dr. Friedman, can you tease us, what do you think your next book or books will be?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I'm working on, I've working on is a maybe a little bit give me too much credit on what I've started. I'm still a little bit burnt out from the last book, but the next book is going to be about the connection between health and productivity. And so I have the view that, and I've written articles about this for Harvard Business Review, is that exercise makes you more productive at work. And it's because when you get blood flowing to the brain, you're able to focus more attentively. You're able to retain information more effectively. It puts you in a good mood, which is critical to being successful at work. Because if you think about what we do at work, we collaborate with other people, or we need to sell someone on something. And being in a good mood isn't just something nice to have. It's actually a critical part of being successful on the job. So I'm interested in all of the ways that elevating our health can make us more successful.
I'll piggyback off of something you just said with kind of burnout and recovering from this hefty effort that you've just gone through. I feel like most people can sustain a fairly intense pace for a while. And where I struggle is when you finally have time to catch your breath and then figuring out how to get back up. Anything you learned along the way that can speak to that?
I think a big part of it is not rushing the process and just trusting yourself that you're going to get it back. And another thing that this is something that actually is going to go into the next book is, this is research that I've looked at on recovery and quickening recovery. And it has to do with, I think a lot of people think that the solution to burnout is to work less. But in fact, what we really need to do is, I'm just going to sneeze for a second, any minute now, is not necessarily try to do less work, but to accelerate in a different direction, meaning throw yourself into a different project that is really energizing. And that's how you actually recharge your battery. It's not by sitting at home watching Netflix. It's by doing something else that's super active, that requires a lot of you, but just has to do with a completely different topic. And so for me, that's been consulting work this year. And I'm waiting for the desire and the itch to want to throw myself back into research. And I sense that it's getting there. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, we got a couple minutes left. Any other questions for Dr. Friedman? I'm going to ask a selfish one. So I'm monopolizing the time here. Can you take me through your writing process? I have found this to be one of the most challenging things I've ever done. And I've compared it to, I used to be able to run marathons. Trina can still do them. I can't. But the discipline every day to get up and do it, overcoming the self-doubt, at least for me, trying to formulate my thoughts coherently, and then doing it in the right environment. Recently, I'm forcing myself not to write when I'm at home because I find I'm distracting myself from my family, and it's better for me in an environment. So can you take me through your writing process, if you don't mind?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is that I have learned, I've written now 2 books. And one of the things that I've come to realize is that most of the work is in the outlining. And if you can get your outline dialed in, meaning what are just bullet point out what the points you want to make are, and think about how to transition between sections. If you can get that dialed in, then you've got a roadmap for just writing, and the rest is just effort. And what's really hard is when you get to a section and you're not sure how to finish the section or how to connect it to the next section. And that's why you want to front load that. It's really easy, much easier to do it in advance, because then you almost like you're outsourcing it. It's like, that's Graham tomorrow. Fuck that guy. I don't have to worry about that guy. I'm worried about me right now. I just got to get the outline done. And so if you can, and this is true for other projects as well, is try to separate the thinking from the doing. And so outlining is key. Once you've got that dialed in, the rest is effort. Now the other part of your question is, how do you deal with the actually efforting part? And to me, I've come to realize that my best writing is done in the morning. It's not done in the afternoon, and I can get twice as much done in the morning as I do in the afternoon. So I don't even attempt to write in the afternoon. I'll just write in the morning, because that's when I'm at my best. And it's more joyful that way. The other thing, the last point I'll share with you is that, and this is a tip from Ernest Hemingway, not mine, but that tip is to every day try to bullet point how you're going to start the next section, so that you're at least starting from a place of revising as opposed to starting fresh.
Dr. Friedman, do you have ghost writers that you work with?
I do. I personally do not hire them, but I have a consultancy that helps people with their books, and we have ghostwriters, but I don't work. It's interesting, because actually one of the things I'll tell you between us is, of course we're recording this, between us is like the number of people who actually author their own book is minuscule. Like, it's very, very few people actually do this, because it's actually, from a business perspective, it doesn't make sense to write your own book, because you can hire somebody to write a book for a small fraction of your, if you're a certain author at a certain level, for a small fraction of your advance, and you can make money. And obviously it's not just like you just some schmuck goes and writes a book and you put your name on it. It's like you're leading them along the way. So it's actually, it's like building a house versus hiring a contractor, right? So most writers actually do not write their own books, but in my case, and I think Graham's, I actually do write my own books.
If you saw how poor the writing was in mine, you can guess if I did it or a ghostwriter.
Well, Graham, there's no shame actually in hiring somebody. Honestly, like, there's no shame if you're ultimately doing this for the purposes of building a business. It's an investment like anything else. Nobody says to anybody, "Hey, I don't think you coded your website." Nobody ever says that. Why does it matter who wrote the book, as long as the ideas are yours?
Yeah, in all seriousness, there are 2 people on this call who have had a huge hand in my writing. Has been my wonderful assistant, Patty, who helps balance my calendar and make everything possible. And then Trina, was a second set of eyes on the first book. So I appreciate that. One last question, then we're going to let you go. Again, these are selfish, geeky author questions. Syntax, like I can just sit on a word for like an hour and say, how can I make that a better word? Do you have any advice for me in
I have a
not doing that?
Yes.
What's that?
So first of all, don't do that your first draft. In other words, just get the idea out. It doesn't matter if it sounds amateurish. That's the second draft, is polishing. And so I'll go through, 4 to 7 drafts of every chapter. Some authors will be 25 drafts. My first book was more drafts. I got better at it. And the other thing is when you hear a word that really resonates with you in a podcast or an interview or an article, capture that word and create a dictionary for yourself of synonyms. So I have a dictionary that I've created for myself of how I would say the word naturally and how a better writer would say that word. So if I capture that word, I'll put in front of it is how I would say it. Is like, so for example, if I want to say important, that's fine. But the better way of saying it is crucial, vital. I don't know. I'll have to look at my dictionary. But my point is like somebody else will say crucial, but Ron will say important. And as long as I have that at the tip of my fingers, then I can start replacing those words and sound a lot better.
That's
And
awesome.
one last thing is I put in the chat to answer Jeff's question, a good piece of fiction that I read this year. The plot, it is very readable. If you guys have seen the HBO show, what was that show? The plot, the show on HBO was what's it? Hugh Grant was in it. Nicole Kidman. The Undoing. So if you've seen that show, this is the same writer. It's just as addicting, and so that's a book I enjoyed this year.
Yeah, Dr. Friedman, this was tremendous. He is a nationally recognized author. Again, the best book I've read. I highly encourage you. This is a group of motivated people and learners and people who always want to get better. I encourage you to buy this book for yourself, but think about somebody in 2022 that is trying to get better, that is striving for greatness, and buy this book off of Amazon. Again, I'm going to buy 5 for my friends, and I highly encourage you to do so. But we're really grateful for your time, and I'm going to turn it over to Carol for a brief presentation here to Dr. Friedman.
First of all, I'd like to thank you, Graham, for giving us this opportunity to hear Dr. Friedman. Dr. Friedman, your presentation was fascinating. The connection that you made between physical activity and its the force that it has on an intellectual activity was also fascinating. I loved this presentation, and thank you so much. We are going to make a donation in your name to Freewheelin' Community Bikes, which is an organization that strives to connect youth with the skills for life over a shared passion for the bicycle. One bike, one youth, one relationship at a time. Thank you once again. And I just look forward to getting my hands on your book. It's going to be one of the things that is on the top of my list for my next shopping spree. Thanks again. And thank you, Graham, for bringing Dr. Friedman to us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
We are adjourned.